She was sleeping in seat 19B when the pilot's voice came through. "We have no control." 4 words. That was all it took. Maya sat up straight. Around her, people were already starting to panic. Breathing fast. Gripping armrests. Eyes wide. She had seen this before. In burning buildings. In floods. In collapsed structures. She knew exactly what to do. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The sleep that finds you on a red eye is different from any other kind. It does not ask permission. It does not come politely, waiting at the edge of your awareness until you invite it in. It takes you. It pulls you down through the engine noise and the recycled air and the low-grade discomfort of a middle seat, and it holds you there, in a place below dreaming, where nothing is required of you for a little while. Maya Suresh was in that place. She had been awake for 22 hours before the wheels left the ground at LAX. 3 days in Los Angeles for the National Emergency Management Conference, breakout sessions on mass casualty event coordination, a panel she had moderated on interagency communication failures, 2 dinners that ran until midnight with people she only ever saw at these things and liked more than she liked most people she saw every day. Her conference lanyard was stuffed in the left pocket of her fleece jacket, the plastic badge face down so the text was hidden. Her carry-on was in the overhead. Her shoes were still on because she had meant to take them off, and then the sleep had come before she could. The man in 19A was on a laptop. Blue light. Spreadsheet, maybe. Or email. She had not looked closely enough to know. The woman in 19C had her neck pillow inflated and a sleep mask already in place when Maya sat down, and they had exchanged the small polite nod that means we do not need to speak and that is a gift, and then they had both honored it. Nobody had read her name badge. Nobody knew what was in her pocket. The engine hum moved through the seat frame and up through her spine and became something like a heartbeat, something her body recognized and organized itself around. The cabin was dark. Somewhere behind her a baby made a small sound and was quiet again. The flight attendants had done their safety demonstration and dimmed the lights, and now they were ghosts in the aisles, checking, adjusting, moving softly through the dark. Maya Suresh slept. Before you find out what woke her, if this story is hitting you hard, if you've ever thought about what you would do in a moment like this, take 2 seconds and subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming. Stories about ordinary people who turned out to be exactly what was needed. Subscribe and you won't miss them. Now. Back to seat 19B. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 operating as Flight 2247 from Los Angeles to Chicago O'Hare had been airborne for 2 hours and 11 minutes when the MCOS system activated for the first time. The Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. It was software. It was designed to push the nose of the aircraft down under specific flight conditions, to compensate for the repositioned engines on the MAX airframe that could, under certain circumstances, produce an uncommanded nose-up pitch. The system was meant to make the MAX feel like the older 737 models that pilots already knew. It was meant to be invisible. It was meant to activate once, briefly, and then stand down. It was not standing down. Captain Diane Holloway was 52 years old. She had been flying for 26 years. She had flown through weather events that had ended careers, had made decisions in deteriorating conditions that she still sometimes turned over in her mind at 3 in the morning, not because she had made the wrong call, but because she understood, more than most people ever would, how thin the line was between a decision that held and a decision that didn't. She had silver hair she kept short. She had a daughter at Northwestern studying environmental law. She kept a small laminated photo of that daughter taped to the side of the instrument panel, a thing she had done since the girl was 4 years old, a private ritual that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with the particular kind of focus that comes from knowing exactly what you are flying home to. She was fighting her own aircraft. The MCOS had activated and pushed the nose down. She and her first officer, a 34-year-old named Daniel Reyes who had been flying the MAX for 2 years, had countered, pulling back on the controls, working together, feeling the airplane respond and then feeling the system push again. The pitch trim wheel was spinning. She had reached for the stabilizer cutout switches, the ones that were supposed to shut the system off, that every MAX pilot had been trained on after the accidents, the ones that were supposed to end this. She had cut them. The system had not responded the way it was supposed to. It was not supposed to be possible. The cutout switches were mechanical. They bypassed the software entirely. But something in the fault chain, something that would take 8 months and 3 investigative teams to fully understand, had created a condition where the trim was continuing to actuate through a secondary pathway that the switch should have isolated. The nose wanted to go down. She was holding it up with her arms and her training and 26 years of understanding what an airplane feels like when it is trying to do something it should not do. Daniel was on the radio. Air traffic control knew. They had been given a squawk, the discrete transponder code that tells everyone watching a radar screen that something is wrong without broadcasting it to the cabin. The nearest diversion airport was Louisville. They were calculating. They were talking through options. Diane Holloway picked up the public address handset. She had thought about what to say for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was a long time. She used all of it. She did not lie. She did not perform calm. She did not have. She did not say the word emergency, because the word emergency in a cabin at night over Indiana does not produce useful outcomes. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a control systems issue. The flight crew is managing the situation. I need to ask, if there is anyone on board with Boeing flight control systems experience or avionics software engineering background, please press your call button now. We could use your help." She paused. She breathed. She said, "We have no control of a critical system, and we are working to restore it." Then she set the handset down and went back to flying. Maya Suresh woke on the last 4 words. Not on the announcement. Not on the words Boeing or avionics or control systems issue. On the last 4 words. We are working to restore it. Her brain, even in the deep place it had been in, had processed the sentence and identified the shape of it, the shape of a sentence that was trying very hard not to be what it was. She had heard that shape before. In the first minutes after a building collapse, when a fire department public information officer was trying to tell residents something true without triggering a stampede. In a community meeting after a chemical spill, when the phrase manageable situation was doing work that the word toxic should have been doing instead. She sat up. The cabin was already beginning to come apart. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. The beginning of collective panic in an enclosed space is quiet and contagious, and it spreads through the nervous system of a crowd the way cold spreads through an office, not all at once, but person to person, the physical signals reading and being read, the breathing changing, the posture changing, the sounds changing. She had seen it. She had seen it in a school gymnasium during a flood evacuation, and in a parking structure during an earthquake aftershock, and in 3 different hospital corridors when the word fire had moved through them at 2 in the morning. She knew what it looked like at its beginning. She knew that its beginning was the only time it was possible to do anything about it. She reached into her left pocket and took out the lanyard and put it around her neck. She stood up. She did not go to the cockpit. She had nothing for the cockpit. Whatever was happening up there was being handled by people with 26 years of formation and a training manual and an air traffic control network and whatever engineering resources they could reach by radio. The cockpit did not need her. The cockpit was not her job tonight. This was her job. Right here. 80, 90, 112 people in a pressurized tube in the dark, with a pilot's voice still hanging in the recycled air, and the particular silence that follows a sentence that nobody knows what to do with. She stepped into the aisle. In a suburb of Seattle, in a house that backed onto a stand of Douglas firs, James Park's phone rang at 1:47 in the morning. He was already awake. His 8-year-old had had a nightmare 2 hours before, the kind that required 20 minutes of sitting on the edge of the bed and talking about nothing in particular until the small body beside him relaxed back into sleep. He had gone back to his own bed and lain there in the way that parents of young children lie awake after a disruption, not anxious exactly, just present, just aware, the monitoring function never entirely offline. He was a Boeing avionics systems engineer. He had worked on the MAX MCOS architecture for 4 years, had been part of the team that developed the post-accident revision protocols, had reviewed the cutout switch documentation more times than he could count. He was 47 years old. He had a small scar on his left hand from a soldering iron in 1999. He kept his technical manuals on a shared drive because he had learned, years ago, that 1:47 in the morning was not a time of day that could be predicted or prepared for. He picked up the phone. He was in his kitchen in 12 minutes, pajamas still on, the technical manual open on the counter, his laptop pulling up the specific revision documentation for the secondary trim actuator pathway. The voice on the other end of the call was an airline operations engineer who was patched through to air traffic control who was in contact with the cockpit. James Park was at the end of a very long chain. But he was the end of it, and the end of it was what mattered. He listened to the fault description. He thought for 11 seconds. He said, "Okay. Here is what I think is happening." He walked them through it. He was careful. He was exact. He did not speculate beyond what the fault description supported. He said the word attempt before he gave each instruction because he could not guarantee the outcome and he needed everyone in that cockpit to know that. He gave the first override sequence, a specific combination of manual trim input and system reset that was not in the standard procedure, that existed in the revision documentation as a theoretical pathway for a fault mode that had been modeled but never operationally encountered. In the cockpit, Diane Holloway and Daniel Reyes attempted it. The trim continued to actuate. James Park said, "Okay. Don't move anything. Let me look at something." He pulled up a secondary document. His finger moved down a column of text. He found what he was looking for. He said, "There is a second pathway. Here is the sequence. It is going to feel wrong because the first step is going to increase the input before it reduces it. You are going to have to hold through that." Back in the cabin, Maya Suresh was in row 22. She had moved through 19, 20, and 21 without stopping. In 19A, the laptop man had closed his screen and was holding very still in the particular way of someone who has decided that stillness is a survival strategy. She had put her hand on the armrest, not on him, on the armrest, and said, "I'm Maya. I work in emergency response. The crew is doing their job up front. I'm going to make sure things stay calm back here. Okay?" He had looked at her lanyard. He had nodded once, the nod of someone choosing to trust something because the alternative was worse. That was all she needed. In 22A, the man was hyperventilating. She knew what it looked like before she reached him. The hand gripping the armrest white-knuckled. The chest moving too fast and too shallow. The eyes fixed on nothing. Hyperventilation in a pressurized cabin in a crisis is a specific problem because it is visible, and visible distress is contagious, and the people around him were already beginning to mirror his breathing without knowing they were doing it. She had maybe 90 seconds before it spread to the row behind him. She crouched down to his level. Not standing over him. Not performing authority. Level. She said his name, she didn't know his name, but she said, "Hey. Look at me. Just me, right here." He looked at her. His eyes were wide and wet. She said, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to breathe out. Not in. Out first. Long and slow, like you're fogging a window. Can you do that?" He breathed out. Ragged, incomplete. "But out." She said, again. "Just out. You're doing great." She said it a second time. A third. She kept her voice at the specific register she had learned in year 4 of her career, in a training program run by a retired firefighter from Peoria who had told her that the voice you use in a crisis is an instrument, not an expression, and you can tune it or you can leave it untuned, and untuned instruments make noise and tuned instruments make music, and what you want in a burning building is music. Lower than your normal speaking voice. Slower. With weight in it. Not warm, exactly, warm can read as false. Grounded. The voice of something that has weight and is not moving. The man's breathing slowed. Not fixed. Slowed. She said, "Good. Stay here. I'll come back." She stood up and moved to the row behind him. The mother was in 23B. 2 children, a girl who looked about 7 and a boy who was maybe 4. The boy was asleep, somehow, impossibly, one of those children who could sleep through anything. The girl was awake and watching her mother with the specific attention of a child who has learned to read a parent's face for information about how afraid to be. The mother had the controlled expression of someone holding themselves together for someone else's sake, which is the hardest kind of holding together because it is performed while the person doing it is also terrified. Maya sat on the armrest of the empty seat across the aisle. She said, "You are doing an incredible job with them." The woman blinked. That was not what she had expected to hear. Maya said, "Your daughter is watching you. She's deciding how to feel based on how you look. You already know that. You've been doing it perfectly." The woman said, very quietly, "How bad is it?" Maya said, "The pilot is the most experienced person on this plane and she is working the problem right now. That's the truth. That's everything I know." The woman said, "Are we going to be okay?" Maya said, "I can't promise you the future. Nobody can. What I can tell you is that right now, in this moment, the crew is doing their job. And right now in this moment, you are keeping your daughter calm. That's real. That's happening. Hold on to that." The woman looked at her daughter. The girl looked back. Some exchange passed between them, the specific wordless communication of a parent and child who know each other completely, and the girl leaned her head against her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Maya moved on. She found the young woman in 25C by the silence. In a crisis, the loud people are not the ones who worry you. The loud people are expressing their fear, moving it outward, keeping it in circulation. The silent ones are the ones who have gone somewhere inside themselves, who have stopped processing outward and turned entirely inward, and what happens in that inward place is invisible and can be anything. She had learned this in year 7, from a psychologist who consulted for Cook County Emergency Management and who had told her that the quiet ones are the ones you watch for, because they are the ones who can get to a very bad place without anyone noticing until it's too late. The young woman was maybe 23. She was in the window seat with her knees drawn up to her chest and her arms wrapped around them, and she was staring at the oval of dark outside the window with an expression that was not fear exactly. It was the expression of someone who has decided something. Maya sat down in the middle seat beside her. Not crouching. Sitting. Making herself a presence, a physical fact in the space beside her. She did not say anything for a moment. Sometimes the first thing you do is simply exist near someone. Then she said, "I'm Maya. What's your name?" A pause. Then, "Priya." Maya said, "Priya. I just want to sit here for a minute, if that's okay." Priya didn't say yes or no. She just shifted her eyes from the window to Maya's face, and that was enough. Contact. The beginning of a thread. Maya said, "Is there someone you're going to Chicago to see?" Another pause. Then, "My sister. She just had a baby." Maya said, "What's the baby's name?" And the young woman said, in a voice that was very small and very real, "Arjun. They named him Arjun." Maya said, "That is a beautiful name." Priya uncurled, slightly. Not fully. But her feet came down from the seat. Her arms loosened. She said, "I've never flown before. This is my first time. Maya said, "You're doing better than most people do on their 10th time." Priya looked at her. She said, "Are you scared?" Maya thought for 1 second and said, "Yes. And I'm okay. Both things are true. That's always how it is." Priya was quiet. Then she nodded. Something had shifted. The businessman was in 17B, forward of Maya's row, and she reached him on her second pass through the cabin. He was angry. She had seen this before, the fear that comes out sideways as aggression, as blame, as the need to find something or someone responsible for the situation and direct all available energy at that target. He was in his 50s, suit jacket still buttoned, and he was speaking loudly to the man in 17A, who was not listening but could not escape, about the incompetence of the airline and the airline's engineers and the FAA and about how he had specifically requested not to be put on a MAX and he had been assured and now look, just look at this, and someone was going to answer for this. She came and stood in the aisle beside his row. She said, "Sir." He looked at her. She said, "I heard you. I understand." He said, "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Maya Suresh. I'm a crisis response coordinator for Cook County. And I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong." He said, "What?" She said, "I need you to be quiet. Not gentle. Not apologetic. Direct." She had learned that some people, in crisis, respond to a gentle tone as though it confirms their fear, as though it is the sound of people trying to protect them from a truth that is bad enough to require protection. Those people respond differently to directness. To the sound of someone who has no time for softness because what is happening is real and requires real tools. He opened his mouth. She said, "The people around you are listening to everything you say. Some of them are already scared. When you express your anger right now, it sounds to them like evidence that the situation is worse than they thought. I'm not asking you to pretend everything is fine. I'm asking you to hold your anger for 2 hours, and then, when we land, you direct it at every single person at that airline until you are satisfied. I will give you the names of 3 regulatory offices to contact. But right now, I need you to help me keep this cabin calm. Can you do that?" A long pause. He said, "You really think we're landing?" She said, "Yes." He closed his mouth. He turned forward in his seat. He was still rigid with it, with the fear that had nowhere to go now, but he was quiet. And quiet was what she needed. At 1:58 in the morning, James Park read the second override sequence to the airline operations engineer, who relayed it to air traffic control, who relayed it to the cockpit. Diane Holloway listened to the sequence. She repeated it back. James Park said, "That's correct. The first input is going to feel like the wrong direction. Hold it for 3 seconds. Then the reset." She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. She said, "Together." They moved through the sequence. The trim actuated, downward, as promised, the nose wanting to go, and she held the control column and he held it with her and she counted, 1, 2, 3, and then Daniel's hands moved to the system reset and there was a sound, a small electrical sound, barely audible over the engine noise, and the trim wheel stopped. She waited. 5 seconds. 10. She let the control column move, just slightly, just enough to feel it, and the aircraft responded the way an aircraft is supposed to respond, honest and direct, without the system pushing back at her. She sat with that for 30 seconds. Just flew. Just felt it. 26 years of feeling what an airplane feels like under her hands, and what it felt like now was correct. It felt like what it was supposed to feel like. It felt like hers again. She picked up the handset. In the cabin, Maya was standing at the forward galley when the PA clicked on. She heard Diane Holloway's voice change. She could not have explained how she knew, but she knew immediately. She had heard the voice of someone managing a crisis and now she was hearing the voice of someone reporting the end of one. The difference was not in the words. It was in the breath underneath the words. The pilot said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the control systems issue has been resolved. We are in normal flight and continuing to Chicago O'Hare. We will arrive approximately on schedule. I want to acknowledge the work of a passenger in row 19, I don't have your name, who kept things together back there while my crew and I were focused up front. That was skillful. Thank you." The cabin exhaled. It was not cheering. It was not applause. It was the particular release of a large group of human beings who have all been holding something in their bodies and have been, suddenly, allowed to put it down. It sounded like a breath. It sounded like a wave receding. Maya put her hand flat on the galley wall and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she went back to her seat. The landing at O'Hare was quiet. The wheels touched the runway and there was the roar of the thrust reversers and the deceleration and the lights of the airport coming past the windows, and then the aircraft was on the ground and people were already reaching for their phones, already unbuckling before the seatbelt sign was off, already returning to the specific busyness of arriving somewhere. The man in 19A touched her arm as they stood to get their bags from the overhead. He didn't say anything. He just touched her arm and nodded once, and she nodded back. Priya, passing in the aisle, said, "Thank you." And then she was gone, into the flow of people moving toward the front of the aircraft. At the jetway door, there was a flight attendant she didn't know, and then there were the passengers moving past her, and then there was a woman in a pilot's uniform standing just beyond the jetway entrance. Captain Diane Holloway was 52 years old and she had silver hair and she was standing exactly where the jetway met the terminal corridor and she was looking at Maya. Maya stopped. They looked at each other for a moment. Then Holloway extended her hand. Maya took it. The handshake lasted longer than handshakes last. Not dramatically. Just, longer. The grip was firm and even on both sides, and neither of them said anything, and the passengers moved around them like water around two rocks, and when they let go they stepped apart and Maya walked into the terminal and Holloway turned back toward the aircraft and that was all. The Blue Line train from O'Hare to the city runs underground through the dark and then, somewhere east of Harlem Avenue, rises above ground, and when it rises above ground on a clear April morning what you see is Chicago coming toward you, the rooftops and the water towers, and then, as you get closer to the city, the skyline assembling itself in the east where the light is coming up off Lake Michigan. Maya sat in the front car with her bag between her feet and her conference lanyard in her hand, not around her neck now, just held. The shirt she was wearing had Cook County Emergency Management printed across the back in small white letters. She had been in it for 37 hours. She looked at the skyline coming toward her and she thought about 17 years. She had gone into emergency management because her uncle had died in a building collapse in Gujarat in 2001 and she had watched, from very far away, what happened when the systems that were supposed to protect people failed, and she had decided, at 26 years old, that she wanted to be someone who understood how those systems worked and how to hold them together when they started to fail. She had spent 17 years learning the specific grammar of emergencies, the language, the sequencing, the 1,000 small decisions that happen in the first minutes and determine whether something bad becomes something survivable. She had thought that grammar was for certain kinds of places. Operations centers. Command posts. The kinds of situations that generated incident reports and after-action reviews and official documentation. She had thought she knew the shape of the moments when her training would be useful. She looked at the lanyard in her hands. She thought about the hyperventilating man and the long slow out breath. She thought about the girl named Arjun who was waiting at the other end of someone's first flight. She thought about the businessmen and the regulatory offices she had invented. She thought about the young woman uncurling her feet from beneath her and setting them down on the floor of the aircraft and what that small motion had meant. She thought about the cockpit. About Diane Holloway, who had done the hardest possible version of her job tonight and had done it exactly right, who had reached out for help through the only channel available to her and then let the help come and then held level flight for 30 seconds before she spoke, because 30 seconds of level flight is worth more than any words. She thought about a man in pajamas in Seattle with a scar on his left hand and a child who had had a nightmare, sitting at a kitchen table with a technical manual, reading a sequence over a phone. 3 people doing the thing they knew how to do in the moment that required it. That was all. That was all it ever was. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Bridgeport, 3 blocks from the L, and when she put her key in the door the city was fully awake and the morning light was coming through the kitchen window at the particular low angle of early April, filling the room with the kind of light that is more white than yellow, the kind that makes everything look slightly more precise than it normally does. She sat in the kitchen chair. She did not take her jacket off. She had to go back out in 2 hours and it seemed easier. She set the lanyard on the table. The badge was face up now. Maya Suresh, Crisis Response Coordinator, Cook County Emergency Management. Under her photo. Under her name. She looked at it for a moment. Outside, a bus went by. Someone's dog was barking 2 streets over. A siren, distant, going east toward the hospitals. The city. She put both her hands flat on the table and looked out the window at the light coming off the lake, far away on the horizon, and she thought, I have been carrying this thing for 17 years, and last night, over Indiana, in the dark, in a middle seat at 37,000 feet, it found the place it was meant to go. She had not known, until the moment it happened, that there was such a place. She had not known that the grammar of emergencies was not a language of specific locations but a language of specific moments, and that the moments could be anywhere, could arrive inside the ordinary shape of a red-eye flight, could demand everything she had in a space 31 inches wide. She sat with that. The light moved on the wall as the morning came properly open. Maya Suresh, jacket still on, lanyard on the table in front of her, the city filling with its daily noise outside the window, sat in her kitchen and thought about what it means to be exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, not because you planned for it, not because you saw it coming, but because you spent 17 years becoming someone who could be that, and the world, eventually, found a use for what you had become. She looked at the badge one more time. Then she got up to make coffee.